Welcome to our first IndTech GTI event, which today will focus on Electro Mobility. I am Henrik Jonsson. I'm a professor in computer science, and I'm also currently the Global Head of Science and Innovation at Business Sweden. I previously lived in Silicon Valley, was affiliated with the Nordic Innovation House and a visiting professor at Stanford. I was also the Swedish Science and Innovation Counselor in DC. We are truly happy to see so many faces here today and that you decided to join this important event. Electric vehicles are anticipated to be a key future component of the world's mobility system, helping reduce impacts on climate change and air quality. I actually privately bought my first electric vehicle last Friday, and I'm so happy and enthusiastic about it. It's a very different feeling when you drive it and the whole ecosystem around it. So during this event, we would like to discuss this topic from a holistic system perspective and how global collaboration could be a key in building this future together. This event is organized by Swedish IndTech, and we are proud to co-host this first session with the US organization Womanium and GTI, which is the Swedish-US Green Transition Initiative. It's an initiative between the Embassy of Sweden in DC, the Swedish Energy Agency, Vinnova, and Business Sweden. And we're very proud of today's speakers and panelists. The panel will be moderated by Prachi Vakaria. She's the founder of Womanium Foundation and also affiliated as a transportation and innovation specialist at Amazon. Today's speakers are Linda Andrén. She's the director at the Sweden-US Green Transition Initiative. We have Katarina Berglund, she's a manager at Automation Region, and Elin Svanström, Innovation Accelerator at Electrification Hub. And finally, we're very happy to announce our special guest today or tonight, depending on where you are, who will give the opening remarks. The ambassador, Karin Olofsdotter, unfortunately caught a bad cold and need to save her voice for the big Nobel event tomorrow night in DC. So we welcome Björn Arvidsson. He is the Minister Counselor and Head of Trade and Economic Affairs at the Embassy of Sweden in Washington, D.C. So please, Mr. Arvidsson, the screen is yours.
Hi, everyone, and thank you very much, Henrik, for the introduction. As you mentioned, unfortunately, the Swedish Ambassador, Karin Olofsdotter, she has this very bad cold, but she sends her best regards to all of you. First of all, thank you very much to the organizers for arranging today's event under the Green Transition Initiative banner. Today's topic is indeed a very important one, the future of electromobility. And when it comes to the future of mobility, the transition to electric vehicles is crucial to reach our climate goals. As you know, climate challenge is real. We can all see it. We have soaring temperatures, we have storms, we have rainfall, we have flooding, we have fires, and it's getting more and more urgent to address its underlying causes. We need strong and impactful efforts in all different fields and a holistic approach, as Henrik mentioned already. Transition to a clean energy industry and a low carbon society also contributes to several of the sustainable development goals that are very important to the Swedish government. It is also a great opportunity for economic growth and for job creation, which is actually what my part of the embassy is working a lot with. We need to act now and we need to work together. And the US and Sweden indeed have a very long cooperated in the field of science and innovation. There are many ongoing joint R&D projects between Sweden and US researchers, and we feel that the quality of these results are good as well. And this cooperation is also helped by the fact that the US is the most important market for Swedish direct investments. We are having a lot of Swedish companies in the US. They cover a wide range of sectors, and they do a significant part of their R&D here. And that's, I think it's important for our conversation today as well. We feel that Sweden we have a lot of things to bring to the table. According to the latest global ranking, Sweden is the world's third most innovative country in the world, and we're also the most innovative country in the European Union. We've been here already a long time in the US. We have a strong presence, but we're very much pleased at this moment that we also have the new US-Sweden Green Transition Initiative launched. As Henrik already mentioned, the Green Transition Initiative is a joint initiative of Business Sweden, the Swedish Energy Agency, and the innovation agency Vinnova, supported also by the Embassy of Sweden in Washington, D.C., where I work. The objective is to connect Swedish and US stakeholders within green energy ecosystems and to be a platform for cooperation between our two countries. You will learn more about it from Linda Andrén, who is the initiative's newly appointed director, which we're also very happy to have now in the US. And she's actually sitting in the same building as I am in the House of Sweden in Washington, D.C. We see a great match between the Biden administration's ambitions for green transition and the Swedish innovative products and solutions that we have. And because of that, we also believe there are many areas where we can increase the bilateral cooperation even more. But for doing that and for addressing all these challenging issues that I mentioned, we need great minds like today's speakers and panelists. Very happy to recognize familiar names and friends here among the speakers. Very excited to be part of this seminar. Thank you all for participating, and I look forward to hearing what the experts have to say in the upcoming discussion. So thank you very much, Henrik, and good luck to all of you. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you also for the opportunity to co-host this event together with you at IndTech and Womanium. I've just joined as the director for GTI, and I actually landed in Washington 2 weeks ago. With me, I bring experience from being a program manager for Chalmers School of Entrepreneurship and setting up an incubator. But mostly, I've been working with the industrial setting. I've been working within Latour Group, hosting business, running business units and having factories around Europe, and also working with business development and sustainability and management level at Gunnebo. So what I bring is an understanding of what it takes to really change business model and the dependencies you have in the supply chain. And COP27 has just ended, but when it was started, it was with a reference to an AC/DC song. We are on the highway to climate hell. And this we need to stop. We need to bend the curve from linear business models to more circular. And we also need to radically bend the curve of the emissions. And this we need to do together. And to do so, we need collaboration between organizations, businesses, and within academia, and also at policy level. So this is also the reason why the GTI initiative is initiated. And it is backed, as we have heard, by 4 parent organizations. We are a small team, but we will be 100% focused on the green transition. And we also connect to the US-Sweden ecosystem, spanning from R&D and academia and large corporations. We have our head office in Washington, as Björn said, in the same house as the embassy. We are also present in Silicon Valley. And our focus is to accelerate innovation and R&D collaboration and attractive green investments to Sweden, but also to establish system demonstrators. We are one point of contact for all actors that are interested in collaborating around sustainability. And as you've heard, we are in the early days of formation, what we will do. So I urge you to take contact with us. It's an opportunity for you to influence what we are doing. So send us an email and we'll grab a cup of coffee in Washington, D.C. or set up a team meeting. Now I'm very much looking forward to listen to the rest of the day. Thank you.
My name is Katarina Berglund, and I'm the manager of the Cluster Automation Region for automation solutions in world class. And together with our partner, the Strategic Innovation Program, Process Industrial and IT, we host the platform, the IndTech Green Transition Program, and are so thankful for the opportunity and the strong collaboration with the GTI and Womanium. And of course, particularly this important event. So thank you everyone for joining, and we are so happy to be here today. Thank you. Thank you.
Perfect. Electrification Hub is an innovation accelerator, and we are aiming at accelerating innovations within electrification of transportation by heavy vehicles. And we do this in close collaboration and the co-creation with the industry, with academia, public actors, startups, and investors. And the goal is, of course, to drive the transformation to a zero-emission transportation system that is working in seamless symbiosis with the energy system. So we are looking for system solutions and ecosystem collaborators in the value system of electrification. We want to enable demonstrators and test pilots where innovators and enablers can meet to make real change.
So as everyone mentioned, I'm one of the co-sponsors, or my organization is one of the co-sponsors for this event, Womanium, which you see up there. Womanium was started with the goal to advance people, especially young women, in the cutting edge of sciences. And some of our programs have included a focus on quantum computing, especially using quantum computing for making new battery materials, electric vehicles, as well as the science of aging. So I welcome all of you to have a look. But beyond that, my day job, I work with Amazon. Amazon's heavily focused and has made the climate pledge, which is a commitment towards green energy. And for a lot of companies, be it the automakers or nearly every company has these climate pledges. We've seen that over 60% of all new vehicle sales by 2030 will be electric. So we have all this hype, all this momentum towards electric vehicles, and the question lies is, what next, what beyond? Are electric vehicles truly green? And what do we need to do to actually make the entire value chain of electric vehicles greener? Everything from the minerals and its extraction to its processing, to the charging infrastructure that needs to be in place, and of course to the energy, and especially green energy that we need to produce to fuel all these vehicles. So to help answer and give perspective to all these questions of how do we electrify the entire EV value chain, I have four amazing speakers with me today. First off, we have Jennifer Gerby. Jennifer leads and is the acting director for an organization called ARPA-E, Advanced Research Projects Agency, which is part of the Department of Energy that funds cutting-edge energy research and technologies. Then we have Robert Falck, the CEO and inventor and founder of Einride. Next, you'll hear from Andreas Voller, the head of sustainability at Scania. And last, you'll hear from Elissa Hurley, the Director of Infrastructure Incentive Administration at CalSTART. All right, so let's kick off our panel discussion for today. We really wanted to build up the suspense before you hear from Jennifer. So Jennifer, over to you.
Thank you so much for the invitation to be here today. And anybody who's local in DC knows it's a beautiful day today. A very good day for electronic transportation. I myself am an e-bike commuter, so there's some batteries involved there. I wanted to tell you just a little bit about ARPA-E. As you know, this country has some interesting needs when it comes to electric mobility, and the current administration is a very big promoter of these technologies. And the Department of Energy as a whole has a lot of different work going on in these spaces, including around deploying existing technologies. ARPA-E is a little bit different in that we are relatively small. We are sort of a little bit separate, and we're not really roadmap driven. We are supposed to come up with sort of the moonshots, you know, the new technology options that don't exist now that can put us on a truly disruptive pathway. And we work on areas that are from fusion to agriculture and everything in between. And the way we are formed is with a core of what's called program directors, and we all come on term limits. We're here from 3 to 5 years and then we leave. So we're always starting something new. And what we do is really figured out from the ground up by those program directors. So we do not have a roadmap that says a certain percentage of our budget is going to go to batteries or to anything. We do this together in a very collaborative way, again, from the ground up. So we look for technology gaps that we can fill. And if you fill that gap with the right metrics, including metrics looking towards the market and towards impact, that will enable something new. And, you know, we do have a lot of interest in this space. For example, we have a program out right now called EVs for All that really focuses on some of the gaps that we see that exist, especially in this country, which is gaps around ultra fast charging, therefore enabling people who live in, say, apartment buildings, high density housing, the ability to have electric vehicles because they won't be able to charge them where they live. cold weather performance, which obviously we're not the only country that's interested in that, and also battery lifetime to enable the secondary market, because most people can't afford new cars. So what does it mean when you're thinking of the used car market when it comes to electronic vehicles? So we put together metrics based on this that are somewhat technology agnostic often, and teams apply. It's a very competitive process, pretty extensive applications, internal, external reviews. Then we form a portfolio of technical approaches and work very closely with these teams over the course of usually about 3 years and about $40 million to sort of achieve the goals of the program. So that's just a very brief overview of sort of how we work. But I wanted to just give you all that an idea, but feel free to ask any questions, including what the DOE is doing as well. I can always point folks in different directions. So thank you so much, Prachi.
Thank you, Jennifer. Robert, over to you. Tell us more about Einride and the vision you see for electric trucks.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for hosting me and being part of this great event. And we also have Theodore here joining. We started Einride with the sole purpose of addressing the 7 to 8% of the global CO2 emission that actually comes from the heavy duty transport. Back in 2016, when we started, there was common conception in the whole industry that you couldn't transport anything with electric trucks. And that started to change, but we are still looking and seeing an industry that are not changing fast enough. I mean, of the trucks being built today, more than 99.9% of all trucks are still diesel-based. And given that fact, the change will not happen fast enough. So that is what at the core we built and started the company for. What we have with the power of digital, electric, and autonomous is the business case to make the transition into a completely electric transport sector for heavy trade transport. So the technology exists for us to make a major change. Now it's just about the market and the actors to make this change happen. And that's why we started Einride, to pioneer and to tell the story that something different is doable. And we managed to be the first to go on public road with autonomous electric transport vehicle. And we are now also first to go without a safety driver on public road in the US as well, in Selmer, Tennessee, which of course is a major milestone both for us and for the overall market, something we're extremely proud of.
So yeah, I'm the head of sustainability at Scania. We're a 130-year-old company. So compared to Robert, we're really the dinosaur in the room here, producing trucks, buses, and solutions, power solutions for various applications. We operate in more than 100 countries with our production systems in Europe and Latin America. We're also building a third industrial hub in China to be able to serve our Asian markets. And we're in a transformation. I mean, and it's very much driven by the realization that we just cannot continue as we've done in the past. And the strongest manifestation of this, of course, Robert has already been into, is the technology shifts: autonomous, connected, electrified. But this transformation will not only change technology, but the whole business. Change more in the next 10 years than it has in the last 100 years. In 2020, Scania was the first OEM manufacturer to have our carbon reduction target approved by Science Based Target Initiative. We are committed to achieving the Paris Agreement and to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees. And to do so, we will reduce CO2 by 50% and by our products use by 20% to 2025. So that's a very short. And these targets are very aligned with our growth targets, our volume targets, our technical plans, and they're based on the scenario work we're doing, market predictions, analysis of the maturity of various technologies, and cost estimate. But all we need to be on or below the curve that science has given us to limit the greenhouse gas emissions. And our message is clear. Vehicle technology will not be the bottleneck in the transition to zero emission transport. Already today, we're investing more in electric powertrains than in internal combustion engine technology. In Södertälje, our base in Sweden, we will open a battery factory next year and invest more than 1.5 billion Swedish crowns and another 1.5 billion to build a battery lab where the modules and the packs will be developed. We're right now rebuilding our production line to open serious production of electric trucks. So by 2030, we expect electric trucks to make up half of our volumes. I'm looking forward to the discussion on how to make this transition both just and sustainable. Thank you.
Great. My name is Alyssa Harley. I'm the Director of Infrastructure Incentive Administration at CalSTART. I apologize that my voice is a little raspy today. I caught a cold over the Thanksgiving holiday. CalSTART is a nonprofit working across the United States and internationally towards a zero emission transformation and market acceleration to a zero emission and green technology future in transportation. We work with across sectors, with industry, governments, and communities to bring this transformation about. We have programs focused on vehicles, infrastructure, and zero emission corridors for a cleaner, less carbon intensive, and more economically viable zero emission future. Our goal is for 30% new medium and heavy duty vehicles to be zero emission by 2030 and 100% by 2040. I oversee two programs. One is a medium heavy duty commercial vehicle program called Energize Commercial Vehicles. This is a program with the state of California, the California Energy Commission, to deploy zero emission, that's including electric and hydrogen charging infrastructure across the state. And we just completed our first year of incentive program. We also have a light duty program. And yeah, I'm happy to be here to speak with you, with the Swedish government, Mr. Albertson. CalSTART is also part of the Global Drive to Zero, part of the Global MOU co-leading with the Netherlands. And we're happy to be here today. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for the remarks. For those of you who are listening in, please do type in your questions or comments in the chat here. I will be monitoring it and we could get to your questions shortly. But as moderator, I get to ask some of the first questions. So to all the panelists, how do we ensure sustainability in our transition towards electrification? You all mentioned some really interesting initiatives. Jennifer, you mentioned about battery lifetime and how do we extend that? Alyssa, you also mentioned the role of charging infrastructure. So where do you see the needs for sustainability within that electrification chain itself? What do we need to do to make sure even the charging infrastructure we're putting in is not using energy, for example, during peak times? Is there something that's been done to address this?
Yeah, I can speak first. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go right ahead.
Oh, okay. I would say on for medium and heavy duty vehicles, a large percentage of those operating those vehicles are independent owner operators and small fleets that generally have older vehicles to start with, and they don't buy the newest vehicles all the time. One of the business models that I've seen that is newer coming about is charging as a service or infrastructure as a service, where the trucks and the infrastructure are provided by a group that's available on subscription or publicly for these smaller operators to make it easier for them to transition. And with that being more centrally managed, they can then optimize for the grid and put in other technologies as well, such as battery backup or solar or other generation. But I think that a focus on the smaller operators, how to assist them, and then also how to make sure this infrastructure being brought in largely to communities that are disproportionately impacted by climate change, how can we work with the communities to make sure the infrastructure is going in a way that partners with the communities, creating local jobs and opportunities really accessible for these medium and heavy duty vehicles? A lot of infrastructure that is focused on at different states and across the nation has been on light duty and passenger vehicles. But a lot of that infrastructure is not accessible to medium and heavy duty vehicles that require larger turnarounds and stuff like that. So I think that that is part of the sustainability there, is working with the communities and working with those small fleets.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. It needs to fit into existing business models. Or to you, Jennifer.
You know, I think EVs and EV charging is such a good example of how everything is really interconnected. And you know, questions about, for example, peak charging times and how do you use these things as potential assets on the grid that are controllable. I mean, there are technologies available such that you can do that today. It's more of a question of, well, how do you deploy these and how do you manage such a large number of very small assets on a grid? And, you know, that will come down to a lot of the specifics of how grids are owned and operated in different countries and things like that. So sometimes it's not so much a technology question as it is regulatory or policy or other things like that. But it is something important to think about, as is, where does the energy come from that you're using to charge your car at the end of the day, right? I mean, thinking of doing a carbon life cycle analysis on not just the hardware involved in the car, but the entire system that you're using to get that to work. So it's a bit subtle, but it's interesting when you look at that from this sort of a life cycle question, the types of things that can make a big impact. And I think that something like battery lifetime or recyclability is a good example of one of them.
Fantastic. Let's talk about infrastructure, because that's an important piece you touched as well. And this is a question for all the panelists: is what kind of infrastructure do EVs require? And for example, I used to work with a company called AES, a large energy company, and we were very excited to see the electrification of transport. But of course, we asked ourselves, how do we build and generate the renewable energy that's needed for it? Another question, of course, we asked is, you know, what kind of sustainable energy systems do get supported when you have EVs? So for example, demand response and how the grid can be managed, or V2G technologies, all these things can help the grid in the future as well. So where are you seeing the infrastructure, and how do we go about electrifying the infrastructure? And this is also applicable for Robert and Andreas, you know, from the OEM perspective. How do you work with OEMs? How do you work with utilities? Do you work with them? And what is your role and thinking here? Anyone can jump in.
Sorry, I kind of was dropped out of the call for a while, but on infrastructure, we believe that in the short run, the majority of the infrastructure need in heavy duty will be covered by depot charging and destination charging, and we're working with our customers with turnkey solutions. So basically also helping them with partners to set up the depot charging needs. But very soon we will also see a need for public charging along the major roads. And then we're talking really high capacity. We're talking maybe a megawatt when it comes to charging a truck in the time that will be needed. And what we're doing here in Europe is that we have collaboration with our competitors, so Volvo and Daimler, and us has gone together to build out a charging infrastructure, setting up 1,700 high capacity charging points along the major roads. That is only a fraction of what is needed, unfortunately, and we need to work with governments, cities, infrastructure partners, energy utilities to get the rest up, because we're going to need tens of thousands of charging points in Europe to be on par with the development of EVs.
Right. Absolutely agreed. Go ahead, Robert.
Yeah,
Seems-
I think it's a very interesting point, but I think that the challenge here at the core is about utilization and who can utilize the charging. If you want to have and do heavy duty infrastructure and actually make the business case work, it's about utilization and how to run and operate the vehicles itself. And that means that infrastructure need to be able to support that. That means that when it comes to public charging and access, at the core, it's going to be still that you need to be able to actually plan and execute on when and how, because that's going to be the asset in itself. That means that we should be a little bit conservative and save our money from a societal perspective on doing joint and big build outs on sort of infrastructure to support electrification heavy duty freight, because at the core, it will be a competitive edge to have the access and have to build up for the infrastructure itself. And that means that those kind of collaborative models are at core will not function for the market itself. So I wouldn't say we could be potentially a waste of money, but it will be not the necessity a pure driver of this change. I think there's an excellent business case for electrification. I think that if it wasn't for the legacy market itself, I think this transition will have gone way faster. I think that we will be surprised of how quickly this market will change over the next 5 to 10 years. We see that already at the prices of hardware that we see now, between 40 to 50% of the entire market should be electric, driven by the businesses right now, and that will only increase over time. But key here is both charging, but the charging needs to be connected to the new business models. I think that one of the key challenges for this market is the consolidation of the market itself. We have a legacy market that have a driver to produce and to sell and have as many vehicles as possible operating in the market. I don't think that's necessarily true for manual electric. I think it will definitely not be true for manual and for autonomous electric. That means that we have a consolidation of the number of units in the market, and that will also drive a radical different way of building out their infrastructure for the market supporting as well. So we have a different market coming, and I think that from a society's perspective, I think we should save our money and let the business cases do the work, because it's a real fundamentally attractive business case for it.
Yeah, this is really interesting that you mentioned about attractive business cases as well. Where do you see gaps in a business case? Like you mentioned, utilization of charging infrastructure. What are some key gaps in the supporting infrastructure that exists today? And Jennifer, you take the long-term horizon. Any thoughts from your side? You know, what are gaps that still need to be filled in EVs more broadly?
So it's interesting. I mean, obviously we are in the US, there's a big focus on deployment of things like charging infrastructure. You know, for the first time, a joint department between the DOE and DOT was put together in part to manage this. And I think driveelectric.gov is the website for that. So there's clearly a need to do that. In terms of gaps, in terms of technology, I think that, you know, there are really different needs when you look at something like EVs versus electronic transport from other ways, whether it's aircraft, whether it's rail, multimodal. So one of the things, a small program that we're putting together at ARPI is looking at models for multimodal transport and how can you make the right choices in terms of where you put infrastructure, for example, for electric trains, because there is just so much space to cover in our rail lines between the coasts, for example. So it's not always clear exactly what the right decision is to make. So I think that we need to, again, sort of understand these systems and the complexities between different modes of transport to be able to make the right decisions. And so that might mean different battery technologies, for example, but again, it might be where do you actually put the infrastructure in terms of charging technologies for something like rail. So I think there's a lot of places for opportunity in terms of tech there.
Fantastic. Thoughts from Alyssa or Andreas? gaps in infrastructure or business cases, please?
Yeah, so I think that when you're looking at business cases, the business cases of those that use heavy duty vehicles are all different. Even if you look at just heavy duty trucking, for example, the duty cycles, how the vehicles are used and when and how far vary in that sector. Most people think of the long haul trucking that goes across states or very long distances across countries, but there's also those that go in and out of ports. Those are generally going shorter distances between a port or a rail yard and a depot center. And there are business cases that they focus just on this shorter distance. And if you can get charging infrastructure along those known corridors, along those known truck routes, at the port, at the depots, it'll make it easier for that subsection of trucks to go electric. We also see some vehicle to grid demonstration projects in the San Diego area with school buses, where school buses operate in the morning and at night. And they are generally not being used during the day. They can help with peak load during the day. So you have to look at the different duty cycles of these different types of vehicles and identify what type of infrastructure might be needed. For those drayage trucks, the ones coming in and out of ports, it might be faster charging and batteries that are much bigger in terms of the vehicles. But when you're talking about a school bus, they're charging overnight. They can use level 2 or lower capacity charging. The batteries can be smaller because they're operating within a fixed area on fixed routes. And we see transit agencies also getting far with not just using the plug-in charging, but also inductive charging that goes in at street level or overhead. For the street level ones, we've seen Lancaster and Antelope Valley Transportation Authority use inductive charging to increase their ability to cover these routes. This is not in a very urban area. This is in a spread out desert. And they're using inductive charging that is at each stop that can extend the range of the buses. So there's a lot of different types of technologies, and each business case and each duty cycle of those businesses is going to be important to look at when we're looking at transforming the heavy duty sector, or even the replacement of heavy duty with medium duty vehicles, such as you see in transit.
I must say that Alyssa here has so many great points, and my compliments that something that that is really, I see the same future in the same way. And I think that there are so many nuances to the heavy duty market that has a lot of truth to it, and which also are driven by the legacy structure of the market. I mean, there are main reason why there are so big diesel engines in the industry overall is that, well, they're good to sell. And I mean, there are 850 horsepower diesel engines in the trucking space. And I would say that you would need to utilize them at any point, really. So it's, also in debate of electric, you're always discussing and adding that it, for some reason, that you don't have the range. That's also a lobby project and a lobby product of the old industry. That's something that they've been utilizing and working very hard to establish. But the most accurate way to describe it is actually that electric has, what you need to secure when you go electric is operational uptime, because what you get is a decreased operational uptime due to the charging cycles. But if you do and operate for the prerequisite of that, you can gain a lot of efficiencies, as well as of the gain from electric being actually cheaper per miles driven. So I would say that the fundamentals of the business change when you go electric. And those fundamentals will have an impact on business models, owner structures, and how you run and operate the whole industry. But if you do, you have a great business case for making this change happen. But I think that something that also needs to be added to see the full picture is also the fact that right now we have a heavy duty transport industry with a fill rate of less than 20%. We have a trucks that utilize less than 30%. And that means that you have a transport system that have an overall efficiency of less than 6%. If I were running a factory or any other business that were running an efficiency of 6%, you wouldn't stay in business very far. And we have to understand that that's a product of the existing industry and how the business models work today. I mean, the current truck manufacturers, they have a great incentives to sell as many trucks as possible. And the ones getting squeezed is the owner operators that we already brought up in this call. They are overall, the profitability in the industry is 1 to 2%. That is actually quite weird that we actually allowed this to persist, because we are having, for instance, in Sweden, there is common practice that you work for free for a year to pay off the loan on the truck you operate. So when people are saying and stating that there's a global shortage of truck drivers, it's not. It's a global shortage of owner operators, people that want to buy and own and operate the truck because it's just bad business. And that's a fact, and that's the biggest hurdle for us going electric, not the technology. It's the structures and incentives for running electric, and that's the legacy structures that we are all tied up in.
Quite agreed, and maybe thoughts from other panelists on how we go about addressing some of these inherent inefficiencies that are existing today. One question we have from the audience is, we've been discussing duty cycles and charging. Alyssa, you mentioned this as well, and the life cycles of batteries and trucks. So what is the plan there? How long do you expect these trucks to be on the road? And I'll just broaden the question. I mean, with passenger vehicles as well, I think we thought that the vehicle itself is going to last a long time, but these batteries are going to go kaput maybe in 10 years. And turns out it's the reverse. We see Nissan Leafs, Teslas that are coming to the end of life, and still we have the battery that's at 60, 70, 80% capacity in some cases. So where do you see roles and opportunities here?
This is
battery life cycle and
sorry to jump on this question, but it's one of my favorite topics because it actually exemplifies the whole industry quite well.
Right.
Because historically, there are a lot of manufacturers that make claim on the batteries, for instance, with the warrants and so on. But at the core, it's about the business decision, because it's a business decision how you run and operate them. Because how you actually choose to deplete them and do the overall life cycle is something that is a business decision for the ones operating the truck. That means that it's a little bit like we do today when you run a car. If you are heavy on the foot, you're going to burn more fuel. And if you are very conservative, you do fuel. That's the same for a battery. How you lose and operate it is going to be very much a dependence. So some batteries will be quite depleted once after 5 years, and some will last 10 years. But at the core, that's a business decision of the operator. So that needs to be the person that operates that has to make that decision. And I mean, of course, the battery needs to perform according to the specifications, but the batteries needs to be from the operator's perspective. So there is something that's still the business models are developing on, and it's also a big important part of making electric competitive.
Right, but that begs the question, right? Who owns the battery? And that will determine how one behaves towards it. So who owns the battery and what happens to it afterwards?
I mean, there must be the operator, because the ones making the decision for the business, and the other ones will just be in Swedish we would say cake on cake, but it doesn't translate it well. Yeah, okay. But in it gets a little bit too sweet. Maybe it's just the essence of it. But it's yeah, it will just be. I think that the perception and the concept to come to that conclusion is that you're trying to mimic the existing market dynamics, but from an advanced buyer that doesn't make sense. And I think that's historically when you make this kind of technology shifts, what you only can like really truly rely on is that it would gravitate to less to the most efficient system. And from a current system, it's very efficient to utilize the drivers to be the ones to say benefiting the big corporates. But I think that in the future we will follow the law of thermodynamics.
You know, I think to Robert's point, it's important to consider the sort of the use cycle of the batteries, and what does that mean in terms of, you know, what you're selling and using in terms of a car. So, for example, there's an RPE project about using, you know, car batteries at end of life, which still have quite a lot of life left in them, and repurpose them as grid storage, for example. So sometimes you can actually utilize the batteries to do something else. But also, if you're looking at putting together a new car with a different kind of a paradigm where lifetime is actually the performance specification of the battery, not max power, maybe you don't allow that to happen, so that you can, you know, enable again the secondary market and have batteries that last 15, 20 years. That's a different way of thinking about it, right? That's sort of a different use case. And there's a lot that goes into that, including the controls about how you are allowed to utilize that battery. And so I definitely think that there is a significant opportunity there, but it's thinking about it in a very different way. You're thinking about mobility. You're not thinking about selling a sports car for as much money as you can make. And so I think there's a lot of technical opportunities there as well. But again, you have to consider the use. You have to consider the life cycle in terms of what is the goal of this battery at the end of the day. And I think there are definitely some different paradigms that are possible.
Yeah, it's something we work at Einride have been working for quite a few years, is how to optimize the lifetime of battery in a fleet of vehicles.
Right.
It's surprisingly how big part of the overall economy it is.
Right. On that point itself, Alyssa and Andreas, I want to include you and your perspectives on what are consumer shifts in decision making that should happen or that you would like to push itself. How do we need to change our mindset?
Really sure I understand the question. You mean our customers or?
Yeah, customers. How should decisions be made differently when we think electric?
Well, let me start with saying that the majority of the transport operators are SMEs. They are small business owners with a fleet of less than 10 trucks. And it's really not fair to put the burden of the transition or the shift on their shoulders. It is really hard. I mean, first of all, you have the price tag that is 2 to 3 times as expensive. I mean, even if the business case is there and will be there, and the TCO will reach parity with diesel, are already there in some markets. It is a hefty price tag, and it is something that even that capital expenditure will just not sit right on the balance sheet. Secondly, is the operational challenges, and we've been into some of them, but that's just a mountain to climb, and the charging is a part of that. But it's a totally different business. It's a totally different knowledge set that needs to be acquired. So mindset, yes. I mean, it's a little bit going into what Robert was saying, starting to understand that this is extremely different. You need to optimize differently. You need to think differently in your business as a transport operator, and slowly getting to that realization and then start to change. But it's not as simple as saying you have to change your minds. You have to start going electric. It's tricky, and I think it's all the stakeholders around the transport operators that needs to start rethinking what we do and how we do it, and how we work together, rather than expecting them to think about it. I also have some points on the batteries, but we can maybe let Alyssa come in first.
So I was at Stanford, I remember, in the design school. It's about user experience as well. If we shift a little bit to vehicles, there's a certain user experience there, and operators, there can be some health benefits of going electric because of the reduction in the diesel smog that they're inhaling, the and just the experience. I know the trucks rumble a lot, so there are health benefits to going electric. But if you also move to the charging infrastructure and what Andreas was talking about, the whole ecosystem of what goes into that, there is the reliability and safety and lighting and the what goes around the charging infrastructure. How easy is it to use? But there's also the utility that is serving that charging infrastructure. And the charging infrastructure, if it's not at a depot, is likely going to have a payment system. And a lot of the failures of charging infrastructure can be at that point when you're paying for it. And that can be, that's the telecommunications surrounding it. So it's whether it's hardwired in or if it's dependent on a cell signal, that can fail and the charging infrastructure actually works and there's power there and availability and everything is set very nicely, but you can't actually pay for it. So there's a lot of different pieces around the infrastructure that have to work together well, and a lot of different types of industries that all have different mindsets that also have to be going towards that same thing. And even to install that charging infrastructure in the United States, there's a lot of different layers of government that go into approving infrastructure going in. So the permitting around how it goes in. So I think really, if they have a very positive user experience, if for these owner operators, they don't often have a place to store their vehicle. If you see trucks parked on the side of the road, it's because they typically don't otherwise have a place to stop. If with charging infrastructure and the reality that you can't just fuel up as quickly in most places as diesel, there's going to have to be more infrastructure built up around it. Those are going to be the nicer truck stops. So if you make a really positive user experience there, then you'll get a lot more converted. But if you don't improve the user experience as well, then it's going to just be another reason why people don't convert, not just the price and not just the duty cycles and the batteries.
I must just say, and this back to finding new relationships and new setups. I mean, we are a big customer to Scania, for instance, and we have a big partnerships in finding and exploring how we can the future could look like, and that's a way of exploring and finding new ecosystems, new friendships. I think that's also how the future will look like. I quite often also say with something I think it's worth bringing up is that, I mean, a lot of discussions are writing that all the subsidies for the future and how to make this change happen. I think that we just need to keep in mind that we've been subsidizing the existing system for 100 years. There have been so much money going into the existing ecosystem. We're still putting in more money in subsidizing the existing ecosystem than we're actually doing in, so to say, supporting the new one when it comes to mobility. And if we just could, at the core, stop subsidizing the old system, we will quite quickly leveling the field and make this transition go quite quickly. The other thing is that from what we are seeing, the biggest hurdle or the biggest holdup is not necessarily subsidies, it's regulatory challenges, for instance, to get permit for chargers, to get the existing infrastructure to support the build out, a lot of practical things from a governmental perspective. And those things are, unfortunately, takes a lot of time. I mean, we are building one of the biggest, we are building the biggest charging point for heavy duty freight vehicles in Los Angeles right now. And the biggest challenge we have there is to get the grid to support the charging site. So those kind of practical things are what at the core needs to happen to make this change happen. The technology is there, the market would drive it. It's also about just keeping, so to say, for the government and the regulatories to keep up. And unfortunately, there are some older players that are utilizing this system to slow down the transition. But let's level the playing field and make this transition happen.
Right. There's a lot of inertia with incumbents too. Andres, to your point as well, you're looking a bit more downstream or upstream, I might say, right? Looking at the battery creation and then also at recycling. Thoughts from your side?
Yeah, no, just to say, I know we're short on time here, but just to say that this is a crucial question. I mean, the transition to electrification, and I'm not only talking transport here, I'm also talking wind turbines and all kind of electric engines and batteries, will just explode our need for critical raw materials and minerals and metals. I mean, there is estimation from a report launched today that we will have to dig up 690 megatons of rare earth metals and minerals just in the coming decades. And we need to find the strategies to handle that. And technology choices will take care of some of that, but also moving into much more circular thinking, thinking much more about lifetime extension, midlife upgrades, second life strategies that we've been into, and recycling. And this is key. And I do believe that 100% of the lithium-ion batteries will be recycled in the end of the day. They're so precious, but it won't happen by itself. And we need to invest as societies in recycling technologies to make this happen. We are impressed by the batteries. I mean, we are constantly impressed by the performance and the longevity of them. And I think that second life options will be limited, and recycling is key. I mean, if we're playing our hands right here, we might be able by the 2040 sometimes to have self-sufficient loops. We will just mine the system for minerals and metals if we're getting it right even earlier because of efficiency gains. So for us, this is a crucial point that we're looking into, and we're cooperating also with the Swedish battery cell manufacturer Northvolt, which sets up their own battery recycling facilities now, so creating closed loops on that. Let's not create new sustainability challenges while we're solving an old one.
Right, absolutely. Let's look at the entire life cycle emissions. And I can tell you, everyone from mines to mineral processors, battery makers, to countries themselves are strategically interested in reclaiming that lithium and other precious metals. So hopefully we move to that transition soon. So I've seen we're near time. Would love to give each of you just a quick minute for closing remarks and thoughts, and maybe a larger question. You know, we are here representing some of the best of the organizations, agencies, and companies in US and Sweden. What is the role for partnerships for you, global partnerships as well as local partnerships?
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Sorry, I'll just let them actually give some quick closing remarks as well before.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
Who would like to go first? Yeah.
I guess I'll just speak very quickly. Again, events like this are a great example of how we can sort of communicate more and understand what's going on more across borders. So I appreciate that. I think we're in a global economy, and we have, again, critical materials come from everywhere, and it's something that we obviously look at as well. And I completely agree that that is a big part of what we have to consider moving forward. But, you know, a lot of our technical teams, you know, often have, you know, partners and collaborators across the world. And I think it's important to for us to do work like that, because there is a lot of technical work that needs to happen for us to achieve our goals.
Wonderful, thank you.
At CalSTAR, we work with industry and government community and across the spectrum of stakeholders. And I think it's important to have, you know, everyone's voice, everyone come to the table. And events like this, as well as we've seen great success in ride and drive events where people can actually see and touch and feel the technology. And I think that there's opportunities for more partnerships with the Global Drive to Zero, as well as with our own incentive programs, with Energize, with knowledge sharing, with what has worked and what has been a challenge and what gaps do we see in the market. And to what Robert was talking about, how can we have transitional infrastructure as well, so that when you're trying to install this transformational sites, that you're not as held up by the utility, being able to work with the utility on what temporary solutions can come into play and how we can all work together for workforce development, for solving supply chain backups, whether it's on vehicles, infrastructure, or utility equipment. So I think it's continuing these dialogues and seeing more partnerships with innovative companies like Roberts and existing companies like Andreas. I think it's really a combination of everything.
Fantastic, thank you. Andreas, closing thoughts?
Okay, I'll go. I'll leave the last word to Robert. So I think that we're a part of a group that has an American company, Navistar, and we just started to cooperate closely with them, and we're learning so much. I mean, it's fantastic the way that we're learning from our American colleagues, and we're pushing each other. I think what would be fantastic moving forward, would speed up the transition is harmonization and standardization between Europe and the US. We need to collaborate both for us upstream with the providers of battery cells, but also green steel and other things that is crucial for us, but also downstream with companies like Einride and customers. That's the only way forward here. I mean, this transition, we need to do it together. Otherwise, it will be too slow to meet the climate targets.
Right, absolutely. Over to you, Robert.
Thank you for a great event. There's been a very, I'm just so glad that the overall understanding and knowledge of this transition is moving forward. If we go back 6 years, the conversation like this would not have been as enlightened and understanding of the challenge we're actually facing. I think we need to just recognize the fact that we're all addicted to oil, and this addiction is not going away without rehab. And we need to find new solutions, and we need new ways of working. And this will be a learning process for all of us. And it will be painful for a lot of people. We are, I mean, the Swedish economy we are world leading in producing diesel engines. We are not world leading when it comes to electric solutions. We aspire to be, but we're not. And that's kind of tough truths and tough understandings going to take a lot of work and a lot of knowledge to create. And the only way to do that is through bringing in a lot of passionate, smart people with a willingness to change into the same room. And conversations like this is how you do it. And for me personally, I don't care who gets it done as long as it gets done. But at the core, we as mankind need to get this done.
Right. And if we leave it to others, then it's no one's problem. So thank you all for taking the leadership in each of your organizations and agencies for moving not only electrification, but all the supporting infrastructure we need for a green and clean electrification.